Okay, so welcome back to our weekly Parsha class. The name of this class is Pardes, which is the orchard. We enter the orchard of Torah to enjoy the beautiful fruits of Torah, but aside from the simple meaning of Pardes, which is the fruit of Torah, Pardes is 4 Hebrew letters, Pei, Reish, Dalet, and Samach, which is an acronym for, or I should say, these are the words Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, the simple meaning of Torah, the hints that can be found in the Torah, the derivatives, Drush, that we can derive from Torah, and Sod are the secrets of Torah. These are the 4 different angles from which we can approach the very same Torah, the very same words. You can study with 4 different forms of appreciation. And this week, we will touch upon one of the most essential. I always hesitate when I say one of the most essential parts of Torah, because who's to say which part of the Torah is more essential? The Word of God is all essential, but perhaps in some sort of limited way, we describe some areas as being seemingly more essential to Jewish faith and Jewish belief. And this week's Torah portion includes the Aseres Hadibros, which is mistranslated as the 10 Commandments. And without going into too great detail, the words, the 10 Commandments, is an erroneous translation of what takes place in the Torah portion, of what we call in Hebrew the Aseres Hadibros, which means the 10 utterances, not the 10 Commandments, the 10 utterances. We have far more than 10 Commandments. There are 613 commandments, 613 biblical commandments. Add to that 7 rabbinic commandments. So there's no such thing really as the 10 Commandments. But it is really, more accurately, the Aseres Hadibros, which is the 10 sayings, the 10 utterances that we communicated directly with God. Just a moment. And to add to that, as it turns out, the 10 Commandments actually include more than 10 commandments, right? So the Aseres Hadibros include more than 10 mitzvos, at least 13, maybe more. The second commandment, so to say, alone includes four mitzvos, 4 prohibitions. So it is the 10 utterances. These are the 10 statements that we have direct.
Shneur, can you just mute Steve for a second? Sorry.
Direct communication with God, as opposed to the other commandments, the other 603 or whatever, 600, that we received through Moses. So Moshe received the Torah, Moshe received the Vayidaber Hashem and Moshe Lamer, God spoke to Moshe to tell the Jewish people. As opposed to this situation, we heard directly from God. And even within these 10, the truth is that only the first 2 were absolute direct communication with God. After that, the Torah spells out that the Jewish people said, it's too much for us. We can't handle this revelation. The first commandment, and then the second one, the Medrash says that after the first one, they died and were brought back to life. Second commandment was given, they died and were brought back to life. Let's not go down this path anymore. And therefore, Moshe said, okay, I'll share that with you. The rest of the 8, the others, the concluding 8 of the 10. But I want to dive into one of the 10 dibros, one of the 10, and I'm going to jump to the 4th. The 4th of the 10 commandments, which is the mitzvah of Shabbos. The mitzvah of Shabbos, if you're following in the Chumash, you can find it, the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse number 8. And I will share the screen of the text as it can be found on Chabad.org. Here we are. Okay. All right. Let's get right to it. And interestingly, even though you see even though there seems to be how many verses? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 verses for the 4th commandment. Easy to remember. But when it's read in the Torah, the way it is read like one long verse. And the Torah reading for the 10 commandments is a slightly different style. And one of the differences is that we read each commandment as its own verse. If you're a little bit familiar with the Torah reading sounds, at the end of every verse, there's a sound called a sof pasuk, the conclusion of a verse. So you would think that the way this would be read, because this is a verse, beginning and end, would be Zachor es yom ha-Shabbos l'kadesho, the end of the verse. And yet we don't conclude. We say Zachor es yom ha-Shabbos l'kadesho, sheish es yomim tavod, v'asisa kol maftecha v'yom hashvi. So it's read as one long verse all the way till the end. Each commandment is read as one long verse. The first 2 commandments are read as one long verse. And then later, just to point out here, verse number 13, which includes 4 of the 10 commandments, is read as 4 verses. Lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov. Each one is read as a complete verse. So the sound as we read it is different than how the verses are aligned. But let's go right to the text. Verse number 8. Zachar es yom ha-Shabbos l'kadesho. Remember the day of the Shabbos to sanctify it. All right, seems to be simple. Remember the Shabbos and sanctify. By the way, if anybody has any questions, you are welcome to chime in with them. Remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. Here's the problem. When the Torah repeats the 10 commandments in Deuteronomy 5:12, we have different words. The same, I just jumped, by the way, to Deuteronomy. Here, when God repeats the 10 commandments, here again, we have Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Again, I jumped to Deuteronomy. And here in verse number 12, where we get to the commandment, the 4th commandment, what does it say? Shamar es yom ha-Shabbos l'kadesho. Guard the Shabbos to sanctify it. So which is it? What was the commandment? To remember the Shabbos or to guard the Shabbos? There's several questions here. One is, what was the commandment? What did God say? It's one or the other. Secondly, is there any difference between them? Is there any difference between saying remember the Shabbos and guard the Shabbos? Over here, the wording it uses is sanctify, keep the Shabbos. Okay, keep the Shabbos. What's the difference between remembering the Shabbos and keeping the Shabbos? And which word was actually said? It's a pretty important question, considering that Shabbos is a pretty important part of life. You know, it's often said. I'm going back to the way it is in our section. It is often said that although Judaism includes, as we said earlier, 613 or 620 commandments, there are several commandments, several mitzvahs, which really are the essence of what it means to be an observant Jew. You know, there's many mitzvahs, but if you want to, you know, not to focus on labels, but there is a certain mitzvahs which by observing them, it's really a commitment which makes you an observant Jew. And the 2 which stick out most prominently in that regard are Shabbos and kosher. Shabbos and kosher, because they require you to plan your life around those observances, as opposed to Pesach or even Yom Kippur. You don't have to plan your life around Yom Kippur observance. You know, once a year you come to Yom Kippur and you fast. Once a year you sit on a Pesach Seder and you eat matzah. Maybe for 8 days you avoid eating chametz. But the mitzvah of Shabbos, you got to plan your life around. I mean, you have to take your job. You have to make sure allows you to observe Shabbos. The place you live, generally speaking, should be a community in which Shabbos is observed. You know, it's a week. It comes every week, and you really have to plan your life, events, occasions. If it's Shabbos, it's a problem, or when you're planning, it affects every area of life. And the same is true with kosher. Perhaps not even as much. Perhaps Shabbos more than kosher, especially nowadays that kosher food is so available everywhere. But Shabbos may be the one mitzvah more than any other that affects one's life in its entirety. Anyway, so speaking of that, what is the obligation of Shabbos? Is it to remember the Shabbos, Zachor, or Shomer Shabbos, to guard the Shabbos? So Rashi addresses that. And by the way, as a side note, the Talmud says that everyone agrees that the day the Torah was given was on Shabbos. Everyone agrees that the day the Torah was given was on a Shabbos. There's an argument in the Talmud whether it was on the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan. But everyone agrees that it was on a Shabbos. And that's how and therefore once you understand that the day that this was given was on a Shabbos, you can understand the meaning of this verse a little bit more appropriately. Zachor es yom haShabbos l'kadosho, remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. God was saying, remember today. Think of what's going on today, God says. Today is Shabbos. Remember this day that we are standing upon, which is Shabbos, and sanctify it every single week. So even though Shabbos is the first mitzvah mentioned in the Torah, it mentions that on the 7th day God rested. Right? We mentioned at the beginning of Rishon, but here is where it becomes a mitzvah. Here's where we have the obligation to remember the Shabbos. Says Rashi, Zachar v'shamar b'dibur echad nemru. That guard the Shabbos and remember the Shabbos were pronounced in one utterance. Zachar v'shamar b'dibur echad nemru. And the Talmud then goes on to say, Rashi doesn't say it here. Rashi just says, Zachar v'shamar were pronounced with one utterance. And then Rashi says similarly, different statements like that. So the Talmud elaborates a little bit further. This is Talmud, Tractate Rosh Hashanah. Says the Talmud, Zachar v'shamar b'dibur echad nemru. Zachar and Shamar were said as one. Masha ein hapeh yichol l'daber, ve'ein ha'ozen yichol l'shma. Something that the ear cannot hear, nor the mouth cannot say. It's not something which is humanly possible. We cannot, even though we often use the term speaking out of both sides of one's mouth in a derogatory way. But in a practical way, it is not possible to say two words at once. And it's not really possible to properly hear two words at once. And this is how the commandment was given. So both were true. God said the word Zachar and Shamor together.
Question.
Yes.
So in Ve'ahavta, it makes reference to these words that I command you this day, Hayom. Yeah. So is Hashem also making reference to at Mount Sinai or in the desert when that verse actually takes place, like in Devarim?
Right. So that's a good point. I believe that the Ve'ahavta Hashem Elokecha and V'hayu Hadvarim Ha'ela goes back to Ve'ahavta. It's referring back to the words Ve'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. You should love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. It is about those words that we then say V'hayu Hadvarim Ha'ela. These words shall be on your heart. Which is why that's what we put in the tefillin. We put in the tefillin, which is on your heart, those words, the Shema and the Ve'ahavta. I can go to that section to confirm, but I believe the basic understanding is that these words is a reference to Ve'ahavta, going back 2 lines to the Ve'ahavta. You should love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might.
What about Hayom? Like this day, what day? Is it the day that they received the Torah, or is it the day that Moshe actually said Ve'ahavta, which was much later, in chronology, in time? So what is Hayom? Like what?
So Hayom, it is said over there, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to go too far off of this discussion, but I believe that Hayom is a way of saying, Rashi says that these words shall be for you as if they were given today. It does say that about the giving of Torah, but I think it says it also in general about Torah in general. That a person, every day, these should be as new to you. All right, but I want to jump back to Shabbos because there's really There's really a lot to get to over here. So you have Zachar as Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, says Rashi, Zachar v'Shamar were said together, which is impossible. So, but that's how it was. And therefore, the first time the Torah records it, it records Zachar. Second time the Torah records the second commandment, it says Shamar. But they were both said. And they were said together. Now, practically speaking, what's the difference between Zachar and Shamar? How do I observe Zachar, which means remember the Shabbos? And how do I observe Shamar, which means to guard the Shabbos? So over here, Rashi at the bottom over here gives an interesting example of how you can remember the Shabbos, and that is pay attention to always remember the Shabbos day, so that if you chance upon a beautiful thing, you shall prepare it for Shabbos. So remembering the Shabbos, unlike guarding the Shabbos, remembering the Shabbos can be done at any point in the week. I just remembered this morning, I drove my children to school, and my 3-year-old son, his one request the whole time, because I was actually trying to listen to a little bit of a class, his one request is, no, I want to listen to the Shabbos song. We have a song we play. I usually play it for the kids on Erev Shabbos on Friday to get into the Shabbos spirit. But he doesn't care if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He wants the Shabbos song. So here you have the fulfillment of this idea. My 3-year-old son brought it to mind that as soon as if you see something beautiful, let it be a preparation for Shabbos. The Talmud records an interesting discussion, an interesting disagreement between Shammai and Hillel. That I want to make sure I get the right person for each one. The Gemara states, I think that Shammai, when they would base Hillel, the famous Hillel, whenever he would find if Sunday he would go to the market and find a nice delicacy, he would say, let me save this for Shabbos. Monday he would go to the market, find something nicer. He'd say, you know what? Forget about yesterday's item. This will be for Shabbos. Tuesday he would find something else. He'd say, forget about yesterday's. I can take that. I'll take that off the shelf. This I'll save for Shabbos. That was Hillel's approach, I believe. And Shammai said no. He said, I believe that every day God provides the blessing for that day. So therefore, if I saw something Sunday, I'll enjoy it Sunday. On Erev Shabbos, on Friday, I'll search for Shabbos. So each one, there are two different approaches. Hillel said, no, throughout the whole week, you should try to be focused on how can I remember Shabbos? So the mitzvah of remembering the Shabbos can be done today. However, in a much more practical way, we fulfill this Torah obligation every Shabbos, both Friday night and Saturday night. You sanctify the Shabbos with words. Zachar Yom HaShabbos L'Kadisho. When do you fulfill this mitzvah? When you make Kiddush Friday night. When you hold a cup of wine and you say, Zachar, as we say, Yom HaShishi, we remember the events over a cup of wine. We make the blessing. And the same is true Saturday night. The Kiddush Friday night is much more important than the Kiddush Shabbos day. Kiddush Friday night is a much greater obligation. And you when one makes Kiddush Friday night and one makes Havdalah after Shabbos. Again, what is Havdalah? Sanctifying the bookends of Shabbos, sanctifying it with words in the beginning of Shabbos and with words at the end of Shabbos is the fulfillment of this mitzvah. Zachar Yom HaShabbos L'Kaddish, remembering the Shabbos. You do so with words. So we read about the fourth commandment on Shabbos. We read about it and we think, it's fourth commandment of Shabbos is a general thing. Very specifically, you fulfill this mitzvah by Kiddush and Havdalah. The other commandment is Shamar, guard the Shabbos. Guard the Shabbos is an entirely different element of Shabbos. How do we guard the Shabbos? By not working, by refraining from the 39 forms of prohibited Shabbos labor, as is spelled out in the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch. That's how you guard the Shabbos. So the Shabbos includes two essential components, and we have to have both every Shabbos. You have to remember it by sanctifying it through words. So the fulfillment of Kiddush and Havdalah is a very practical way to do it. But in one's mind, it's about the mindset of sanctifying the day, remembering the holiness of the day, making everything Shabbos-tic on this day. And then a separate component entirely is the idea of protecting it by not working. And I think sometimes we can kind of get caught up on one or the other. My focus on Shabbos is entirely, what am I not allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do that on Shabbos? Not allowed to carry, not allowed to turn on the light, not allowed to put on, not allowed to cook. So then that's nice, but that's only half of it. On the other hand, a person could say, look, Shabbos for me is a day of rest, and I sit with my family, and we celebrate holiness, and we make the Kiddush. But, the whole idea of not doing things, that's not really my thing. I'm okay then after I make the Kiddush and we have a Shabbat dinner together, all right, so what if I'll then go out to the bar or go out to the ball game? I did my Shabbos by having my Shabbos dinner. And the answer is you did half your Shabbos. You did the Zachar part of Shabbos. You didn't do the Shamar part of Shabbos. Shabbos has to have both. And whichever level we're at in how we observe Shabbos, we have to challenge ourselves to properly have both elements of Shabbos. That's the first verse. Continuing on, we only have 5 more minutes. Continuing on, 6 days you shall work, and do or perform all of your work. Says Rashi, such a profound Rashi. Says Rashi, kishetavo Shabbos. When Shabbos arrives, it should seem to you as if all your work is done. Do not think about work. I don't remember names of this, someone who shared this, but he shared about someone who was a very successful business person. I think it was in England or something. But he, if you went over to him on Shabbos and asked him anything about his work, he wouldn't answer. And he wouldn't, it wasn't that he wouldn't answer like out of stubbornness. It's that in his mind, Shabbos came, his work and his career didn't exist. For 24 hours, it didn't exist. You asked him, what do you do? I study Torah, whatever, but to get into any sort of discussion of his business and his career, it just didn't happen. Because in his mind, again, it wasn't some act of holy righteousness. It wasn't a holier than thou moment. It was simply in his mind that whole arrangement shut down for 25 hours. When Shabbos comes, all my work is done, whatever it is, whatever stress I'm going through, whether it's a student in college going through my midterm exams, or it's an investment banker, a real estate mogul, a doctor, a lawyer, doesn't matter. Shabbos comes, it just doesn't exist. Everything has been done. My entire work is done. And therefore, there's a level of calm. There's a level of calm and tranquility. That's why so much of Shabbos is in the heart and the mind. Yes, there is the observance of Shabbos, how it has to be practically observed. But this verse and this Rashi which accompanies it tells us Shabbos is about a mindset. In addition to the observance of it, it's about the mindset that the work of my week is complete and I have nothing to worry about. Shabbos ends, I'll get back to that. It also tells you how profoundly we believe a person's mind is in control, that I can control what my thoughts, and that I can actually maybe take exercise, like all other areas of strength. You need to work on it, you need to exercise it, but I can walk into Shabbos and all of the concerns of the week are gone. B'yom hashvi, and the 7th day, Shabbos l'Hashem Elokecha, is the day of Shabbos to God. Don't do any work. You, your son, your daughter, manservant, maidservant, animal, stranger in your cities. Why? Verse number 11. Because in 6 days God made heaven and earth. Es hayam, es kol asher bam. The sea and all that is in them. And he rested on the 7th day. Al-Kain, and therefore Beirach Hashem is Yom Shabbos Yikashu. God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. I see. So you have you have a question. Let me just conclude with a fascinating Talmud. You may have heard of this story, but I'll share it as it's written in the Talmud, and then I'll take any questions. So one of the words you saw over here we read was that when it comes to the Shabbos, you have to rest. Your son, your daughter, and your animal, behemtecha, right here, verse number 10. Your animal needs to rest as well. It's a very practical area of Torah. The animal needs to rest. You cannot put your animal to work. So here's the story from the Talmud, Tractate Yuma, page 9a. And over there, well, I shouldn't say the story is not recorded in the Talmud. In the Talmud, it records a statement said by a man named Rabbi Yochanan ben Turta. Rabbi Yochanan ben Turta. All right, interesting name. And he says a statement. The Rishonim say, the commentaries in Talmud say, this man was not ben Turta. That was not his father's name was not Turta. But Turta in Aramaic is actually, the word Turta means an ox. So this means Rabbi Yochanan ben Turta could be translated as Yochanan, the son of an ox. So how are we to understand that? It actually seems to be a rather offensive description. So the Talmud, no. This was there's a story over here. The story is that and here's the story. Rabbi Yochanan himself was a convert. He was a convert to Judaism. What was it that helped cause him to convert? Says the Talmud, says the Rishonim, it's brought in the Psikta Rabasi, that at one point, while he was a Gentile, he bought an ox or a cow from his Jewish friend. And the cow was a hardworking animal. Suddenly Shabbos came and the cow or the ox wouldn't budge. And it's like a faulty purchase. What do you mean? I have an ox. Saturday morning is my day off. I get to go into the field and work. Nothing doing. So he goes back to the Jew and he says to the Jew, I want a refund. The Jew says, why? He says, the cow's not working. And just I have no idea, but this cow never stops working. Did you bribe it? Give it some food? He says, yeah, nothing. So the Jew thought, you know what? I think I know the problem. The problem is this cow has been accustomed to not working on Shabbos. That's the reality for the cow for the last many years. Says the Medrash, the Jew went back to the house where the new owner was. V'lachash be'azna. And he whispered the following words. He whispered into the ear of the cow. Para, para, cow, cow. At yodat, you know. Ksheyita bershusi, that when you were in my domain, you plowed all the day of the week, all days of the week. And on Shabbos you were able to rest. Aksha. But now, Shagarmu Avanose says, because of my sins that I've had to sell you. Part of my, I guess he attributed to his sinful behavior that my livelihood is gone. I had to sell you. Now you belong to a non-Jew. So now, I beseech of you to get up and work, even though it's Shabbos, because you no longer have to rest on the Shabbos, or for that matter, you no longer can rest on the Shabbos. And immediately he says this medrash, the cow stood up and lined itself up to go to work.
That is amazing.
So this is the medrash says, that when the Gentile saw this, nasa kal v'chomer, he made the following evaluation in his mind: if an ox or a cow she'ein ladas, doesn't have knowledge, nevertheless recognizes its creator, me, that was created in the image of my creator, and I was given knowledge, how much more so I should have a deeper understanding of my creator. And that's why he went and he converted because of that story. And that's what the Rishonim conclude. And that's why he is called Yochanan, the son of an ox. He was Yochanan who converted by being inspired by a cow, by an ox. So that's the story. And that's the story connected to the observance of the Shabbos by an animal. All right, with that, we'll conclude. And happy to take questions for anybody who has.